We had to find the Messiah, the deliverer, the king. So we looked down one street and there was nothing there. Barak thought he remembered that there had a stable attached to it. And so sure enough, we found it. And we didn't go to the front door. We went around the back there and we came up to the stable. And we run pretty good. Left the sheep completely behind. And we came up and knocked on the door. There was kind of a rustling around inside that stable. This guy opened the door. Big fella, rough hands. Said his name was Joseph. And I said, well, Joseph, Samuel, it's my friend Barak. This is some of our buddies we've been working outside town here. I don't know how to tell you this, Joe, but angels we have heard on high. And they gave us a message. Joe, they said that the Messiah had been born here in the town of David. And it was going to be we'd find him. He's a baby in a manger, wrapped up in the cloth there. Got any ideas about that, Joe? And Joe, he just kind of turned his head to the side and shook his head for a minute like he couldn't believe what we were saying. And then he opened the door, beckoned us to come in. And so we did. We walked right in, and Joe said, this is Mary, my bride. And she's just a young girl. And I got to tell you, she looked terrible. I'm not trying to be mean about this. This poor thing just looked exhausted. She probably had a really hard journey, probably even a worse night. But we explained to her who we was, why we was here, and she nodded very wearily and gestured toward the food trough. And then we kind of walked up to it, gathered around, and there he was. Tiny little baby. Wrapped up tight and snug. Got to keep him warm. Cold, dark night. Kind of a dirty, rough place. And he would cry sometimes. He'd just kind of cry out. I can't imagine he was all that comfortable. You know, but this thing about this Messiah, he'll go anywhere. He'll go to the coldest places. He'll go to the dirtiest places. He'll go to the most hidden places. I learned later that there's no place too dirty and too cold for him to go. Because, you know, I come to understand that he wanted to come and live in my heart. I'm ashamed to admit to you people, my heart can be a pretty cold place a lot of the time. And my heart can be a pretty dirty place a lot of the time. And but this Jesus, this Messiah, this Christ, the Anointed One, would come and live inside of me and inside of anybody who would just ask him in. You know, it's one thing to say you believe in a God who lives up there in the sky somewhere. That's one thing. But it's another thing entirely to say you believe in a God who comes to live with you and even in you. If you believe that at all, that has to mean everything to you. It came to mean everything to me. This little baby here in the dirty, rough wood food trough. But you know, there's even worse places he'd go. I know the wood in that food trough couldn't have been too comfortable for him, but about 30 years after the, well, he went another place made of wood. Outside Jerusalem on a hill. I don't know what it's like to sleep in a food trough, but it's got to be a picnic compared to having a cross on your back. That's the craziest thing about this thing we call Christ Mass. We're celebrating a baby who's born to die. And in his death, we have hope. Of course, there's more to that story. Guess it's hard to keep a good Messiah down. But I'm getting ahead of myself, I'm sorry. We was just sitting there contemplating this baby Messiah. I'd never seen a king before. I just wanted to stare at him. And eventually he kind of started rooting around, crying a little bit more, and we all kind of understood it was time for the anointed one to eat. So we excused ourselves. Ms. Mary, old Joe. And before I left, I thought, I didn't bring him anything. I heard later some folks from out east, they came and they brought him all these fancy gifts, gold and all kinds of other stuff. I don't know what all. I didn't even think to bring a sheep. All I had was some manure on the bottom of my shoes. And the smell in that stable. When you're a shepherd, you learn to stand upwind from the sheep, but enclosed spaces like that stable, you got the cows and you got sheep and you got donkeys. It's not exactly like chestnuts roasting on your open fire. So we left, we walked back out in the street, and we realized we'd followed where God had led us. God had led us, and we followed. And we looked at each other and we said, what do we do now? And we said, well, we got to go tell people about this. We got to share what he showed us. We followed where God led us. Now we got to share what he showed us. We thought, yeah, that's right. We can't just keep this to ourselves. It's good news, great joy for all the people everywhere. And so we decided to share what he'd shown us. And we went out and we told it on the mountain and over the hills and everywhere. We said, Jesus, the Christ is born. And some people would hear our message, we want to hear about the angels, and we tell them. Some people wouldn't, and that was okay. We'd come upon a group of people, and we'd say, God rest you, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Christ our Savior is born upon this day. See, when you follow where God leads you, I think it's important that you share what he's shown you. Because it's a hope, a blessed hope, this Messiah, Jesus. It's a hope that's real. And it's a hope that lasts. And it's good news of great joy for all the people. It's a message of peace for those on whom God's favor rests. You ever followed where God led you? Maybe he led you to this Messiah like he led us. You ever shared what God's shown you? I think that's the important part of my story. That we followed where God led us and we shared what God showed us. And that's the end of my story today, but it's not the end of Jesus' story, not the end of your story while we're all in this together. The story of Jesus, the Messiah. All we got to do is follow where he leads us like good sheep and share what he shows us. So I'll leave you with that. Wish you good people a Merry Messiahmas. Merry Christmas.